Good afternoon, I'm Donald Maurice and I'm happy to welcome you here today to the NZBBC interview series hosted by the New Zealand School of Music at Victoria University and SOUNZ Centre for New Zealand Music. NZBBC stands for New Zealand Baby Boomer Composers. So over this series we're interviewing 10 composers, 2 from Auckland, 2 from Hamilton, 2 from Wellington, 2 from Christchurch and 2 from Dunedin. And I'd like to now welcome today Glenda Keam, who's from Christchurch, Associate Professor and Head of Music at the University of Canterbury. So, warm welcome.
Thanks, Donald, and thanks, everybody.
So I'm going to begin by just saying a few words about Glenda. Glenda was awarded a PhD in music by the University of Auckland in 2006 for her analytical thesis exploring notions of national style, New Zealand orchestral music in the late 20th century. She was President of the Composers Association of New Zealand from 2007 to 2017. In 2019, she was elected first female President of the ISCM, International Society for Contemporary Music, an organisation dating back to 1922. Glenda has represented New Zealand at numerous international festivals in Australasia, Europe, North America and Asia. She devised, curated and organised the Contemporary Music Festival held in Auckland in 2003 and co-curated the New Zealand and LA Festival in Los Angeles in 2012. She co-edited and contributed a chapter to Home, Land and Sea, Situating Music in Aotearoa, New Zealand, 2011. A composer analyst, her writings focus on New Zealand music studies, music education, music analysis, New Zealand cultural identity in music, and the psychology of creativity. Glenda's compositions have been performed in Australasia, the USA, Canada and the UK. She was a member of the National Youth Choir of New Zealand, the Academy of St Martin in the Fields Chorus in London, and the Britain Singers, formerly BBC Northern, and enjoys performing as a piano improviser. Now to my first question for Glenda. Can you tell us, first of all, Glenda, where you were born and a little bit about your childhood, family memories of music making? Was there music in the family at all? Grandparents, brothers, sisters?
I was born in Auckland, 5th generation Auckland, particularly if you go back through the mothers of the mother's line. There was a piano at home. My dad had been bought a piano by his mother when he was little, and Dad sort of played the piano. It was very musical, and I don't think he'd mind me saying that, but it was there, and I just was always drawn to it. So by the time I was tall enough to reach the keys, if I actually sort of pulled myself up and went like that, I've been playing the piano. But there weren't really any musicians in my family, not really. My dad was a scientist, and I just was different.
So when did you start having formal piano lessons?
I was 6, yeah. There was a piano teacher just down the road from my school in Mount Albert, and I used to go there once a week after school for lessons, and she was quite progressive for the time, so a significant part of our lesson was me working things out by ear, and she allowed me to sort of, we didn't call it improvising, but I could take something that existed and extend it or change it.
That's very interesting and quite unusual approach.
Yeah, it wasn't a huge part of what we did, but it just evolved because I responded well to that part, so yeah, that grew in our lessons.
Did you study any other instruments?
Flute. I studied with Maria Martin briefly, flute, and she was very young at the time. I think she was in her late teens, and she was teaching at the intermediate school Saturday classes, so I was just lucky to get Maria, she was Mary then, as my teacher. And I tried to learn the violin. I wasn't coordinated enough to manage string instruments.
Okay, and is there a point in your life when you can remember when you thought, I want to be a composer, I want to create a piece of my own?
Yeah, I think I created my first piece when I was quite young, probably 11 or 12, I wrote, it was a whole page, and it was called A Foggy Day in London Town. I think it was, I had the film of Oliver in my head, I think, at the time, and it was somehow meant that to me. But no, I didn't think I was going to be a composer, I was going to be a doctor. So I actually went to med school, and it was only when I dropped out of med school that I had a rethink about what my trajectory was going to be. Yeah.
So can you think back for us on your school years, like primary school? Was there much music in your primary school? And what about secondary? What was it like?
Primary school, we did some recorder, and my primary school teacher had a melodica, which I really wanted. I've still never had a melodica. It's on my shopping list.
There's still time.
Yeah. So I used to love watching her and listen to her playing that. There was not a lot of organised music making at my primary school. Intermediate school, Kowhai Intermediate, well, it was Kowhai Intermediate back then. There was a choir, and our class teacher strummed guitar, and we sang lots of things from very faded, cyclostyle sheets that were glued into our exercise books. So we'd sing along to that quite often. I think there's a bit of recorder playing. I think that's the first time I got my hands on a larger recorder, which was better than the little ones. So yeah, I did enjoy that. And I hated sport. I didn't get what sport was for. So the other sort of school communal activities that were sport-based didn't work for me. So luckily there were some communal music-making activities.
What about high school? What was that like?
Auckland Girls Grammar. So our school music teacher, Miss Marinovich, was very, how to characterise her, she was lovely, quite a determined figure, I suppose. But the quality of music making in our school at that time was not great. So yeah, I did a bit of this and that. I got to be choir pianist, that was fun.
Did you play your flute in the orchestra?
I played flute a little bit. There were many flutes in the orchestra, more flutes than violins. Yeah, it was a mistake when they told me I needed to be a violin in the orchestra. That didn't last long, so I went back to flute. But yeah, I ended up, I suppose, accompanying quite a lot near the end of school. But I stopped taking music as a subject after fifth form because I was going to be a doctor.
Yeah. So tell us about that. You left school and you went to med school. How long did you stay there before you found your calling was somewhere else?
No, well, I think it was a joint decision that I wasn't going to carry on after the first year. So then I thought maybe I'd be like my dad and be a physicist. So I switched over to science and did most of a BSc. And I love maths. I didn't like physics at all, and it just wasn't me at all. And then my mother, actually, who's had an interesting effect on my life in many ways, but she was the person who said, actually, you're musical. And I thought, oh, actually, maybe I should just go back to having piano lessons and reconnect with that part of my life. I'd been given a piano when I left home at 17. I'd been given a piano by a friend, and I'd taken it from flat to flat to flat. It got transported on friends' trailers and things from one shared house to another. So it's not like I'd ever detached myself from a piano. I couldn't live somewhere without a piano, but I didn't actually think of myself as a musician for a few years, and then I thought maybe I am. So I went to Donald Maurice and asked him to teach me some piano, and a year later I went to the School of Music at the University of Auckland, and they took me on, even though I hadn't done university entrance music. I passed the sort of special test you do if you haven't got the qualification, and there was no looking back. On day one, I think, John Rimmer was there taking our class. There was a real living composer who actually wrote music and taught and was a nice guy, and I was home.
So you decided at that moment to choose between performance and composition, or you did both, or?
I'd applied for performance and hadn't got in, which was very sensible of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I did the other kind of degree, which is the BMUS for people who don't perform much. I did actually perform a fair amount through my degrees, but it was always a sort of extra thing, playing friends' compositions or accompanying friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little about what it was like to study composition with John Rimmer and other people on staff?
Douglas Mews Senior and John Rimmer and John Elmsley were my teachers at Auckland Uni.
What kind of approach did they take to teaching composition?
Douglas Mews Senior there were short exercises, and so there'd be an exercise like create a melody and then harmonise it using entirely root position chords, but you're not in a key. So, do an exercise. A lot of it was exercises, which was great. The sort of puzzle solver in me enjoyed that, and it actually gave me licence to sort of reconnect with all the sorts of things that I used to sight read. I had all the sort of Thomas Pitfield old books of piano music for accompanying ballet classes lying around at home, so I sort of fell in love with that kind of English semi-modal harmony quite early on. And so I reconnected with that with Douglas, and then with John Rimmer there was a lot more kind of focus on other things. Let's set the pictures aside for a little while and think about other aspects. So that was really instructive to consider music as a collection of parameters that you can prioritise in different ways to bump yourself out of the comfort zone and find out what you didn't know what you were capable of before. So yeah.
Did that training include things like writing pieces in the style of old composers?
Not explicitly.
Just exercises.
We would be exposed to, I suppose the first year course that everybody did, materials of music, that kind of went, this week we're going to look at blues, and then you're going to write a blues piece. So it wasn't copy this particular person, but it was adopt these musical mannerisms and see what pops out, which was really good for me. It broadened my horizons and was fun.
So beyond the University of Auckland, you studied composition further overseas?
Privately, yes. After I finished my master's degree in composition, then I went to the UK, went to some summer schools, went to Dartington, and then with my husband at the time moved up to Manchester, and Neil was learning at Royal Northern College as a singer, and I took private lessons with Tony Gilbert, who has remained one of my mentors and guiding lights to this day. So I'm still in touch with Tony. So he gave me private composition lessons, and every now and then when I needed a little break from just the humdrum of normal everyday life with a small child, if Tony was away, I'd go and borrow his little cottage for a few days in Cheshire and pretend I was just a composer in the wilderness, just for a little while.
Nice. So you've, in your teaching and in your public speaking and so on, you've talked quite a lot about New Zealand music, New Zealand history, and the word New Zealand identity pops up every now and then in your topics.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what you think about national identity in music, what it means to you? Is it important to you as a composer? Do you strive to demonstrate it in some way?
Yeah, that's something I've thought about a lot, and I guess my feelings about it have evolved. I first started to grapple with notions of national identity when I'd lived in the UK for 9 years and then came back to Auckland, and lots of people were talking about New Zealand music as this and New Zealand culture as that, and it's unique and it's special, and I thought, well, is it? Shall we really just dig into that a bit? Unique in what way? Can we name the ways in which it's reflective of whatever? The critics at that point, which was the mid-90s, a lot of the critics were talking about the sense of space in New Zealand music, and I thought, well, what kind of space is this? Is this yeah, so I kind of pondered it, and that became the subject of my PhD, which I took a fairly long time to write, exploring notions of national identity, in particular New Zealand orchestral music, and doing a sort of semi-comparison with some orchestral music from other places at the same time, because I kind of wanted to take a scientific approach, but of course it wasn't a scientific sample size, so it was really just exploring the kinds of tendencies that one could look at. That was my thinking then, at the end of last century into the beginning of this. More recently, and I suppose in that journey I then went back and looked at what Lilburn had tried to do, and in the 1946 Cambridge talk, and then the search for language at Otago some years later that he spoke about. And he was conflicted and confused as well, of course, about what it meant to be of here and for here, and there was a need to have a scene or a sense of belonging, which I recognised, but it was of a different time. I think at the moment my idea about identity is that actually the world in general has an identity crisis. People have a desperate need to belong to something, and how you recognise what you belong to, or how you feel valued by a group of people, or a sort of belief system or whatever to which you might belong, seems to be at a sort of critical point. We've got more populations on the move than ever before, more people who have been disenfranchised or exiled, or whose homes just simply don't exist anymore than ever before, and cultural homes as much as physical homes matter. So I think I'm more interested at the moment in what an individual needs to belong to something, and then the myriad of ways in which that something might present itself, be it an online community, or fans of a particular thing, or people who live in a geographical region, or people of a particular culture who live in a particular region. All those kinds of belongings are so complex, and what an individual makes of that and how they feel affirmed by it is very important to me. And I suppose social media have further served to confuse and compound those challenges that we all face as evolving individuals. So I've thought less about, what is New Zealand, what gets a New Zealand stamp, and how do we know that we belong or don't belong to New Zealand, as if it's one thing. It's many things.
So you've spoken a lot about looking at other people's music and how they've processed it. What about in your own music? Are there any elements at all that you would say are there because you're a New Zealander?
Well, I guess my songs from the Green Notebook, yes. Choral piece was a way of trying to think about that a bit. So I had poetry from a number of different poets in a number of different languages put together, and then mostly the guys got the sort of chanting, which was tree names, mostly Māori tree names, because the connection to the land and the landscape and all of that, which I still was working through in my PhD writing at the time, mattered a lot. And I was trying to make sense of it. So I guess that was a kind of an overt attempt at going, I'm of New Zealand, but I'm also of the world, and these things coexist. And if they coexist in me, then they can coexist in the music, and the kind of interfacing of different layers of music and different layers of text was the challenge that I was attempting then. Since then,
any further elements of Maori music have popped up in your compositions? What's your feeling about the use of Maori culture and elements in music?
Yeah, so for me, no, not at the moment. I have a deep concern that if I were to use something from Māori culture and I don't have Māori blood, I would need to be really sure that the elements of Māori culture that I was referencing or using or honouring, or however you think of that, in putting them into a piece of music, that I really knew, that I had sufficient knowledge of the cultural meaning, and that I had permission, and that I knew that I had permission from the right people, etc. And that those seem like thorny issues. So I haven't really grappled with them, but I've thought about them. So no, not in my own music, not yet.
Okay. So changing tack completely, can you sort of think back over your life of the kinds of music you've been drawn to at different stages? Did you go through a heavy metal stage? Did you do the Beatles and ABBA? What can you tell us about what you've listened to relax to?
I don't think I would relax to heavy metal. I haven't had a heavy metal phase. British rock music of the mid-70s was pretty big for me. It's nice that prog rock has finally come back into fashion, because it was out of fashion for so very long. And I did have, as a 17th birthday present from my best friend at school, she did give me Dancing Queen, the single. So ABBA is in my record collection, thanks to Geraldine. And I listen to lots of different things, yeah. I don't know about to relax. I listen a lot when I'm driving, which is not the best way to listen, but it's actually when I have the longest stretches of time to listen.
What would you listen to when you're driving?
Things that you can hear over the sound of the road. So things on my iPhone include, well, I really like the British band Elbow, actually. I have all of their albums. Excellent lyric writing and quite quirky, and the Northern English accent is refreshingly different from the standard accent of singing. Everything is also a favourite band at the moment. I'm still a fan of the British bands. I'm a bit of an Anglophile, can't help it. Brexit, it pains me to watch Brexit going on at the moment, but there you go. I won't go down that track because that's a red herring. Or Bach, more and more as I get older, I listen to more Bach, and if I sit at the piano, that's what I'm most likely to play. Yeah.
So do you sit at the piano and improvise for your own pleasure, or is it something that you do in public? Or tell us about that, that aspect of you.
When I do it at home for my own pleasure, it's yes, it's mostly sort of harmony and voice leading, going into the maze and just letting my mind drift, which is very therapeutic. If I'm improvising in public, it'll be generally at something like Vitamin S, which I rarely get to go to now because it's Monday nights in Auckland, but there I'll thrash around inside the piano. All the different sounds you can make inside a piano are of the greatest interest to me. So I think if I had the coordination and the instrument, I would have liked to have been a cymbalum player. So the closest I can get is putting implements inside an already tired piano.
Okay, can you think back over the compositions you've written, and are there any that just stand out in your memory as being really hugely significant to you for some particular reason, or special, extra special?
Of my own music?
Yes, of your own music.
Yeah, I'm still pretty proud of the Mind Springs piano piece that I wrote for Xenia Pestova. That's it's made of chunks, and I'm still trying to work out how I feel about the chunk-based composition process. You know, it feels like probably any of my former composition teachers might have said to me, can you sort of integrate those a little bit more rather than just go slab of this and a slab of that. But it came out in slabs and it stayed in slabs, and I think that's good, because I'm not comfy with it yet. But I'm not disappointed by either, and I love the way Xenia plays it.
Why don't we have a little listen to some of Mind Springs?
Yeah, let's listen to Mind Springs.
You started to talk about uncertainty, eternity. Can you tell us a little bit more about this piece?
Yeah, well, I guess I was thinking about time passing in one's life, the finiteness of human existence, and the seeming infiniteness of the skies, and thinking about, again, putting poetic ideas together from a number of different poets. So in this one I brought Mary Ursula Bethel, a Canterbury poet, one of her poems together with, I can't even remember right now, I should have done my homework on my own pieces, but Rilke and some Buddhist notions of time passing, as well as looking into the way exploration of the high-tech thing of, my brother's a rocket scientist, so people put stuff into outer space that then looks back down on the earth, and so we have the evolving earth, and I was just about to move to Christchurch and take up the position there, so the earthquakes in Christchurch and the fact that these satellites can see things from outer space and they can kind of see earth activity, so the infinite and the macro and the micro, and the infinite and the very finite, those extremes, I think I was playing with those. It was in response to a request from Pepe Becker to write something for Baroque Voices with Helen Webby on harp. So, yeah, it was, I guess it was ideas, fizzing of totally different extreme ideas came together, and again it's kind of chunks composition. Got melodic strands here and chordal passages here, and those things aren't reconciled fully in the same way that the notions maybe can't be reconciled fully either. So
let's have a listen.
Yeah.
different kind of question. Have you experimented with unusual composition techniques like serialism, avant-garde kind of techniques and rejected them? Have you tried things out and then thought, no, that's not for me? Or have they stayed in your repertoire?
I guess I don't see serial composition as unusual. It's something that was done for a while quite intensely by people who were making a new thing. And as exercises, I guess I would create a tone row and see what happened. But then the trick was always to see how tonal you could make it sound by some careful placement of other notes underneath. I try and let the starting material tell me what it wants to be. And the starting material comes from somewhere that isn't within my conscious control. It comes from the unconscious somewhere and pops out. Sometimes I get almost like a fizzing feeling it's time I need to sit down at the piano and I'd better have some manuscript paper in front of me, and then I start that way. And that's sometimes the core material that tells me the rest of what needs to come to honour that starting point. But that makes it sound too kind of terribly, wonderfully, magically predetermined, fantastic. I mean, it's actually hard work to write music, as you know, and there's a lot of craft and chucking bits out and, well, my goodness, what am I going to do about how to get from there to there? I have no idea. Can I just go like that? Or do I have to build a bridge? All those things. I don't sort of go, oh, there's an unusual technique that someone else does, I'm going to try it and see if I can do it too. I don't think I do that. But I absorb it anyway, because, listen to new music, huge amount of new music,
So a composition typically would start with someone asking you to write a piece for a particular combination, and then you say, okay, yes, I'll do it, and you sit at your desk, and how do you start? What happens first to get that moving?
Oh, I've got bleeding chunks all over the place. I've got bits of paper shoved into plastic folders. Plastic. I must find a replacement for the plastic folders soon. But at the moment, they're in coloured plastic folders, depending on what kind of stuff they are. And so, there's sort of brain fizz, sit down at the piano, write the dots, and then think, gosh, what is it? Moment. And that happens frequently. And it doesn't necessarily happen at the piano either. I might be on I've written chunks sitting on an Australian train or on a plane, international plane journey. Well, I'll just get out my little music notebook and start writing stuff. And then if someone does ask me to write for them, I might flick through all those things and see if anything screams out to be part of what I've been asked to write. And I don't write that many pieces. I don't finish that many pieces, probably one a year.
So my final question before we go to the floor is just, is there anything about your composition that makes you identifiable? Like if I was to put on a piece, that piece is by Glenda, I recognise blah, blah, blah. Is there anything in your style that you think sort of marks you out in some kind of way?
Apparently, so Jim, my husband, because he will hear me at the piano, he will recognise certain harmonic habits that I have. So apparently, yes, perhaps, but
it's the kind of question it's easy for someone else to answer.
Yeah, right? It's probably. If I said, my brand is this, then, I would have killed it already. It's, I don't know that I've got a brand, but I can tell you the kinds of elements that I think might pop up along the way in my music. If you hear something that might have a mixture of a little bit of Bach and a little bit of foreign and a little bit of Robert Wyatt, it might be me, and that's possibly me flattering myself.
Okay, that's answered as well as it can be, I think. So I think it's time to go to the floor and see if we've got some questions from our audience. Alan, please.
If I'm right in thinking that your partner is also a composer,
Yes, Jim.
so does your music influence each other?
I don't usually get to hear his pieces till they're finished, so that's interesting. Our ideas about music we talk about a lot, and quite a lot of the new music that we each encounter, we encounter together, but actually quite a lot we don't. So what composers think they're doing when they're composing, I suppose that's something we've talked about many times over the years, but when it comes to, oh, I'm going to try this new thing where, you know, Jim's got various quite intense compositional techniques for generating material. He even got my brother to create a very complicated Excel spreadsheet process that would generate stuff according to the intervallic probabilities that he was envisaging, but I don't work like that. And stuff comes out of me really fast, and then I have to look at it and think, what was that? You know, oh gosh. So, yes and no.
Another question.
I was quite interested in your reflection on the English music context. And I was wondering, to spin the question around, whether you'd had feedback from your English or overseas colleagues on whether your music had an identifiable music feel to it, or a foreigner's kind.
Yeah, I guess I've talked about that a bit with Tony Gilbert over the years, and Tony spent quite a bit of time in Australia as well, so he has a sort of Antipodean sensibility that he can switch into and switch out of. And there are certain things that he has commented on in New Zealand music, not just my own music, but in some of the New Zealand music I would play to him. And he'd go, yeah, or that thing again, or what's this thing about endings? You know, we talked a lot about endings, the ends of pieces, how they do or don't go here. Don't know if that's answering your question at all.
Fascinating, Glenda, to hear your recollections of this similar time at university, because of course we were there a year apart, and just thinking about influences. But some of your influences seem to be quite unwitting. You mentioned your father as a scientist, and your brother as a scientist, and then a bit more latterly Jim as picking up on those theories for systems. And it seems, along with your beginnings as a mathematician, there's a lot of influence there that you mightn't even see clearly. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I love patterns, and maths is patterns, and music for me is patterns, and the pulls that exist, the sort of gravitational fields that exist in any particular harmonic system, and the way voice leading works is all a matter of kind of interacting with a system, and of course my PhD was an analytic one rather than a compositional one. So bringing in a sort of critical thinking and looking for patterns, or identifying places where patterns didn't really exist, and how do I feel about that. That's probably my way of reconciling having had quite a sciencey upbringing and yet having the creative urge.
Yeah, I love the way you described the brain fizz in terms of an impulse to go and compose. Is that a physiological thing? Or is it a...
Don't know. I think it's psychosomatic, so it's mind and body.
Let's finish up with you just telling us a little bit about what's ahead for you, what's in your immediate future.
Yeah, so, well, the School of Music at the University of Canterbury is a fabulous thing to be involved with, so that's an ongoing project and it's continuing to evolve, so developing, particularly we're focusing on the new music side of that school at the moment, and really with the appointment last year of our head of new music, just bringing that to becoming its full self is really a part of a project. But more specifically, my own personal thing is that the festival of the World New Music Days for the International Society for Contemporary Music, combined with the Asian Composers League Festival, will be coming to New Zealand next year for the first time ever. So I'm the director for that double festival, which is in 2 cities, Auckland and Christchurch, and so we'll be bringing musicians from 50-something different countries and playing the music from 50-something different countries in Auckland and Christchurch, and that's an enormous undertaking. Obviously I'm not doing it on my own, there's a team, but that's huge.
So will that be a complete package in Auckland, which is then repeated in Christchurch, or it's one ongoing?
It's an ongoing thing.
Follow the event.
It starts as ISCM in Auckland on the 21st of April, and then on the 27th of April, which is Mondayised Anzac Day next year, people fly to Christchurch and the ISCM continues, and the Asian Composers League joins in at that point. So ACL, which has been to New Zealand 3 times before, but only ever to Wellington, will come to Christchurch and sort of augment the second half of the ISCM Festival. So many wonderful pieces of music, mostly extremely new, will be performed.
What a fabulous thing to be organising. Congratulations. Yeah, well done. Well, I think we'll finish there. And
thank you
so much for talking to us today.
Thanks,